Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back today for our second part of this workshop on gender equality and global capital markets. Nice to see a lot of familiar names from our workshop last time. And thanks to everyone who's already started saying hello in the chat. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, remind us where you're coming from. Any other thoughts that you wish to share in the chat, please feel free to do so. Now, because we have a lot to get through today, and there are 2 hours together, I'd like to get started. Just as a reminder to everyone, this training workshop is being hosted by the Rwanda Stock Exchange. So we're very grateful to the exchange for inviting all of you and making this possible. And the content and the facilitation has been developed in a partnership between the IFC, the IFRS. Oh, we have the IFRS in there for some reason. I think that's an error I must have made. The IFRS Foundation is not part of our gender equality training, but maybe one day we'll get them involved. That would be wonderful. But it's actually UN Women. So we'll update that and change that in time for our next, and before we put those slides up online. But yes, it is a partnership between IFC, the UN SSE, UN Women, and also Columbia University, who we worked closely with to develop this training. Just as a reminder, IFC is a partner of the SSE on many of the things we do, including our training workshops, and the IFC has played an instrumental role also in communicating this offer to the market. And we're so pleased that we actually have a representative from the IFC, from the region also with us today. Rose Lumumba is a corporate governance specialist. She brings a lot of expertise as well to us today, and has been working on many topics at the IFC. So I'd really love to pass to Rose to kick us off today with our opening remarks. So over to you, Rose.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. And I'm very glad to be here and to make the opening remarks, of course, on behalf of the partnership, as well as on behalf of the IFC. And so good afternoon, colleagues from the Rwanda Capital Markets, of course, the UNSSE team, and all the partners, as well as the participants. Welcome to the Gender Equality and Capital Markets Workshop. And thank you for attending the training today, as well as, of course, attending on Monday when we had the last training. And to us, your attendance really proves that gender equality is important to the institutions that you represent. And so we are really very grateful. A special thank you to the UNSSE for inviting me to deliver these remarks. And of course, to the Rwanda Stock Exchange for hosting this event. Bravo, thank you, everyone. So gender is a priority to IFC. And this is really reflected in everything that we do, in our commitments, in our strategic outlook, in our KPIs. Everything has got gender balance at the IFC. And also in engaging with the private sector, the IFC supports the clients that we partner with to realize, to design, and to implement gender-smart solutions in their business development. We also support companies in understanding the business case for engaging women and men equally in the private sector. In this regard, we have continually helped them to expand their market share, to strengthen their supply base, to improve human capital, and to create an enabling business environment that really makes them sustainable. Increasing the number of women in business leadership will likely lead to a better overall company performance, including but not limited to financial performance through improved non-financial indicators such as good reputation, investor perception, and stakeholder environment. Internally, we are also very deliberate in moving the needle toward gender equality. And this is reflected in the various advisory and investment work programs that we have, where we prioritize gender balance. And as of December 2022, 63% of IFC nomination directors were actually women. And so you can imagine that we had surpassed our target of 50%. We are now at 63% of our appointed directors to companies. We have also done some work in Rwanda because under the Rwanda Business Legislative Reforms for Women Economic Inclusion Advisory Project, we supported the National Bank of Rwanda in issuing a legal reform that promoted women's access to finance. In November 2022, the National Bank published a new regulation that really related to financial services consummation, and it prohibits gender-based discrimination in access to credit. The legislation also, on a positive note, includes other measures to promote gender equality, such as requiring financial service providers to include gender disaggregated data and gender equality measures in supporting their businesses, and also prohibiting sexual harassment. So you can see that we have put our skin in the game, and we are very happy to have partnered with all the partners that Tiffany mentioned in sponsoring today's workshop. And really, it's an example of our ongoing collaboration, not only with the UNSSE, but also with the other partners as we move forward gender equality and gender parity. So for today, we just want to wish that you have a very good training. It's an interactive training. Please feel free to engage the team, to ask questions, and to make a contribution on what your experience has been. And so I wish you an interesting and useful workshop this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. And we're so pleased that you were able to join us. And congratulations to the IFC for their leadership in this topic. We look forward to continuing to watch that. Great. So just as a quick reminder to everyone to the housekeeping. This is, of course, part 2. Remember, last time in part 1, we were really looking at addressing kind of the complexity of gender equality through preparation and alignment. And today we're going to be looking at implementation and communication. A few ways to communicate with us. Fiona has just shared with you in the chat that you can ask us questions in the Q&A, just like last time. That's where you can get all your questions you want us to answer in, and make sure that we catch them, because we might lose them if they end up in the chat. But you can communicate with the rest of the group via the chat. Also, you can use the Q&A if you want to give us any comments that are anonymous. Now, as a reminder, we're together for 2 hours today. The Q&A is open throughout, so answer questions at any, or ask questions at any point. As Rose mentioned, we do expect you to participate. So in the mentees, in the polls, as we ask questions, please do participate, and we will reward you with a certificate at the end that's certified by CPD. As I mentioned in the first session, at the end of today's training, we're going to share with you a feedback survey, and you're just required to fill in that feedback survey in order to receive your certificate. We'll give you more details about that a little bit later. Now, just to quickly remind you of the facilitators and introduce you to new ones we have today. Both myself and Landon are returning to this workshop from the Monday session. So as a reminder, I'm Tiffany Grabsky. I'm the SSE Academy head, and Landon Wilcock, my colleague, is our project officer and will be facilitating today for you. We also have our colleague Fiona joining us today. She's following your chat and giving you a bunch of links and useful resources in that chat. So thanks, Fiona, for joining and helping us out today. Now, we're also very pleased to be joined with another colleague from UN Women. We have with us today Valentine Waroga, who is a regional program assistant at UN Women. And she will be continuing on what we heard from Maya on Monday about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, hopefully those of you who did not know if your organization was a signatory of the UN WEPs, hopefully you do now know, maybe you looked into it. And if you have any questions, we're very pleased to have Valentine here with us today to address all of your questions regarding the WEPs. We also have today two guest speakers. So we're going to learn various topics today from other experts in different fields. We're going to be joined later today by Tom Hartman, who is a sustainable finance advisor at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. And Tom's going to talk to us all about gender bonds. And we are also very pleased to have with us today Sweta Viswanathan, who is the Global Product Specialist at Brightmine. And for those who don't know, Brightmine, they work a lot in the gender pay gap space, and they're going to share with us a bunch of information today about that gender pay gap and what it means and how to make use of that data. So Sweta, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll hear from both of those speakers a little bit later in our training today. Now, remember, we had this nice little circle pathway that we were working our way through on Monday. So we did work through the prepare and align units, and today we're going to work on implement and communicate. And to go with those two units today, we have a few learning objectives. So our first learning objective today is to help you to understand how to capture market value for gender equality performance. And we're also looking to help you to identify communication channels for gender-related information. To do that, a quick look at our agenda today. As I said, it's 2 hours. We will again have a short 5-minute break halfway through, more or less. The first unit on implement we'll do first, and that's where we're going to look at assessing gender lens finance. And then after our break, we'll dive into that communication unit where we're going to talk about being transparent on gender equality progress. And before we finish up today, we're going to give you a whole breadth of resources you can use as you continue on your journey of enhancing gender equality in your organization. And we'll share at that point too how to get your certificate. Now, I would just like to hear from all of you for a minute. So let me share this Menti. For those of you who remember last time, once you open the Menti, you can continue going back to that same browser every time. So open this up in a browser. You can either use that QR code on the bottom left there. You can use the link that Fiona is sharing in the chat box, or you can simply just type in www.menti.com and use that code on the top of your screen. It's 7823-4174. And once you get into the Menti, it's going to ask you 3 questions. It's going to ask you how comfortable you are in these 3 areas. The first being identifying the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies. The second being communicating gender-related information to investors. I'm just going to close this out here. And then the third being explaining to colleagues the financial value of gender equality. Might get that QR code back up for you and give everyone a second to fill in the Menti. If you're having trouble accessing the Menti, please just let us know in the chat and we'll talk you through it. Okay, so we're getting a few answers coming in here, which is great. As with last time, the first people who answered are the most confident, and then we see it slow down a little bit. But it looks like we're kind of all over the board, more or less. But the least confidence so far seems to be in identifying the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies. So that's definitely something we're discussing today. So hopefully we'll improve all your confidence in that topic. Also, some of you are not so confident in communicating gender-related information to investors or with colleagues when discussing the financial value of gender equality. So I'll just give you maybe 10 more seconds to fill that in so we can get a sense of where you're all at now. Okay. Well, I might leave it there. Hopefully, more of you can get into the Menti next because we're going to do a quick quiz. We're going to wait for a few of you to join. Okay. Nearly 20. Let's see if we can get a few more joined before we start the game. Okay, I'll start in 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's get started then. Okay, so you're going to get one question, and this is a review from yesterday. So the objective we said was equity or equality. Now remember, we had that slide with the 3 bubbles, and one thing was in the middle, and that was what we were working towards. That was the objective that we wanted to reach. Was it equity or was it equality? Okay, 5 more seconds. Okay, well, the majority wins. Quite a few of you did not answer this question, so I'm not sure where you all went, but well done, everyone who did answer the question. Equality was the answer we're looking for there. But I'm going to stop sharing now. We can go back to the slides, Landon, and we can do a quick review of what we did last time. Great. Thanks, Landon. Okay, so here's that slide. I was looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how those collectively help us achieve equality. I'm being told by Zoom my internet is unstable. Landon, if I'm cutting out, let me know and I'll switch to a different internet. So let's start on the bottom right hand side with diversity. Multiple identities are represented, and this can include sex, gender, culture, race, ethnicity, etc. And we had discussed last time as diversity being like seats at a boardroom table. We want to have many different faces, many different ideas, many different backgrounds, all represented at the table. So diversity is really about representation. Then if we move over to equity, equity is really about recognizing and reorganizing power distribution. And so if you remember last time we said equity is a little bit like having a microphone at the table so that all of our voices are the same sound. So someone's not much louder than the other person. We can all be loud with a microphone, which means we're all going to be heard at the same level. So that's really about kind of the power distribution and everyone's ability to speak. Then the final one is inclusion. And this one is something that's often forgotten about, I think, but it's very important. So remember that it's not quite enough to have everybody represented at the table and to everyone be able to speak at the table. But everybody else at the table has to respect and understand what they're saying. So we said it's kind of like having interpretation headphones so that, we're all speaking the same language and we're valuing everybody else's voice at the table. So it's not quite enough to have any 2 of these. We really need all 3 of them in order to have equality, which is indeed the objective of what we're working towards. Now, last time we also focused on 2 key areas, preparation, where we set the groundwork for understanding key terminology, the business case and human rights case, and we looked at how the world is doing so far in terms of gender equality and corporate leadership. So let's remind ourselves more than just the terminology, the point, why we're all discussing gender equality here today. And that was a lot of that we talked about was the benefits that you can get and the reasoning behind it. So For example, we saw that studies have shown that gender equality can decrease violence in society, they can increase economic productivity, and they can increase resilience against financial and environmental crises. Now, just as a reminder, we did not say that this was just women that do all of this. It's that equality of having diverse opinions that have both equal power distribution and inclusion at the table. And so that's making sure that whichever minority is represented. Now, as a reminder, in corporate leadership, we also saw some benefits such as profits increasing, transparency increasing, and improved environmental impacts. Now, we also heard about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles yesterday that Maya introduced us to. And I do highly recommend taking a look at those if you are not very familiar with them or don't remember them in that great of detail from Monday. But as a reminder, the seventh principle, measurement and reporting, was highlighted as one of the key principles. We will be discussing much more detail this topic today, but just as a reminder that you can also come back to the WEPs to learn more about that. Now, finally, we didn't quite have the time to cover this last time. So just briefly, I wanted to draw your attention to this particular slide. Now, remember, we shared this slide after that activity that Landon did with you with Peacock PLC and Owl Inc., where we saw that despite one of the organizations having really great intentions and wanting to advance their gender equality, they didn't quite look into the corporate culture and the reasoning and the barriers that were in place. And as a result, they didn't have very good outcomes. So corporate culture can be really important. And it's something that's very multifaceted. On this slide, you can find various different activities that you can look into implementing in order to improve the corporate culture, to have more diversity, equity, and inclusion within your organization. So that includes things like recruitment practices that might include the blacking out of identity, inclusive job posting, or gender sensitivity training. Also, introducing certain policies. You might want to do audits and research to identify if there's unconscious bias. Also doing gender audits, making sure you're keeping track of data, and a gender pay gap audit. And we're going to hear more about gender pay gaps a bit later today. And then finally, making sure that you have that tone from the top. That can be absolutely essential. To do that, you can work through training and education of boards and leaders, integrating sound ESG practices, and sustainability objectives. Great. So with that, let's dive into this session today, which remember is our implement and communicate. So we're going to start off with implementation, and here we're going to look at accessing gender lens finance. So in this unit, we have two sections. First, we're going to look at financial products that are being used to support gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender allied companies. So let's dive into that by looking at the trends we're seeing in sustainable finance more broadly. So this chart, which you can find in the UNCTAD World Investment Report, shows that in 2022, the total number of sustainability-themed funds worldwide increased, although the rate of growth did slow in 2021. But the total now stands, as of 2022, at 7,012 funds, up 18% from 2021. And these funds are worth around 2.5 trillion US dollars. Now, we do see in 2022 a decrease in global net investment flows to sustainable finance, but we also saw that in all finance. So just as a reminder, in 2022 with COVID, we saw a few different changes in the finance world. But what we want to talk about today specifically, and not just sustainable investing, but gender lens investing in particular. So what do you think gender lens investing is? I'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to pause for a minute now, and please share in the chat. What is gender lens financing or gender lens investing. And you can also use the Q&A box if you'd rather enter it anonymously. Don't be shy. We want participation, remember. So earn your certificate and share with us what you think. Not yet sure. That's an okay answer. It's okay to not know what gender lens investing is. Does anyone have an idea of what it might be? You can take just a stab at what gender lens investing might be. There's got to be somebody other than just Lena that has an idea. Mugisha does. So they said takes the existing differences between women and men into account when analyzing a situation or when developing specific approaches or programs. Sure, so it does take into account gender in investing for sure. Lena says a strategy to invest that takes into consideration gender-based factors across the investment process to advance gender equality and better inform investment decisions. Great, yeah. Ida says investment which takes into consideration gender. Yeah, exactly. So it's not quite as complicated as someone might think. Let's look briefly into this definition. So this from GIN, the Global Impact Investment Network, says that gender lens investing is an investment strategy that's applied to an allocation, a portion, or to the entirety of an investment portfolio, which seeks to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. So we kind of have two sides of the coin there. We're either looking at maybe investing to improve gender equality or investing in those that already have made quite a bit of improvement or have done something particularly well. So let's look at a few of the strategies that are being used in gender lens investing. Now, I will note that there is this particular publication here, Private Equity and Value Creation, is looking at how fund managers can guide their gender smart investing. And they also discuss in that guide, which I think is very interesting, different kind of ways that we can think about improving gender equality in fund management. And so they talk about designing gender smart investment strategies, about engaging, training, and rewarding people in the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders. So those are all things that an investment firm can do. But then when it comes to the portfolio level and actually investing in companies, what exactly are the strategies being used? And these 5 strategies are kind of the main ones. Now, of course, there can be multiple variations on them and very different strategies because that's the job of a fund manager, is to find different investment strategies. But let's look at these kind of main ones. So the first one there being investing in leadership. So that's looking at companies where there's women represented in the leadership. So they could be founders, co-founders, senior management, etc. The second one then is looking at the employees of the organization. So investing in companies that are committed to gender diverse and equitable workforces. Or maybe it's using data such as we saw in the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index last time, where we can see that certain companies might have a certain metric that they measure and policies they have in place to ensure that they have equality throughout their organization. Now, we also have the supply chain, which I think is important to note. I think most people think of the leadership side, but we need to look throughout all the actions of the company. And so in the supply chain, there are investment strategies that are committed to a gender inclusive value chain. So they're looking at, for example, does the company have certain policies and practices that are in place to ensure gender equality throughout all their supply chain, their vendors, their suppliers, etc. Then there's also, so those are all looking at kind of the actions of the company, their employees, their practices, their policies, etc. But then what about what they're doing? What is the objective of that company? So looking at their products and their services, are they committed to offering and designing products or services that consider the distinct needs of women as a consumer segment? Now, I'd have to say, if we're also looking at investing in those companies that are so committed to those products and services, I'd hope that they also have quite a diverse leadership and employees too, because we want their participants within their company who are making these decisions to understand that segment as well. And then finally, the community. So that's really ensuring that their operations do no harm to women in the community, but also maybe are enhancing the way of life or that segment of the population in the community. So the good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, investor demand for gender smart investment opportunities has increased considerably. So this has led to the emergence of a variety of gender focused financial products across asset classes. To give a very brief overview, and again, this very high level summary, let's just take a look here at how investment can be channeled towards gender equality and gender smart investment. So on the left-hand side, we can see that there are a few buckets in terms of the financial products that can be used to direct financial flows towards gender equality. So this includes equity-based financial products, it includes debt or fixed income financial products, then also funds, which can be equity or debt-based. And on the right-hand side, we can see that the investors accessing these financial products also vary. So we're seeing both retail or individual investors as well as institutional investors. For example, making use of these financing vehicles and also creating new vehicles and working with organizations to be able to develop new financial vehicles. I think this is important to note because different investors have different needs and different expectations, which leads to a diversity of products as well to meet these different needs. So let's look at what this looks like in practice now by diving into a couple case studies. I'm just going to check here. I'm already past my time. I think I've been talking too much. So I'm going to go very quickly through these case studies. I might leave one or two for you to look on your own time. So this is a really interesting one on carbon credits. So we have been looking at how we do see that overlap between gender and carbon. So this one, and you can use these slides to dive into these deeper on your own. But I think what's really interesting about this is Gold Standard, which is an organization which looks at carbon reduction emission products and gives them kind of a stamp of approval for the carbon trading markets. And they have kind of two levels of gender responsive certification. This particular one got the full gender responsive certification. So they really had to show their KPIs and what they were doing in terms of gender equality within their carbon credit. But actually, all carbon credits that are certified by Gold Standard do have to meet kind of the minimum level of gender equality requirements by Gold Standard. So that's a really interesting case study that unfortunately I don't have time to go too detailed into. Also, maybe you want to look at this one, which is on a dual benefit bond. This was the first a gender equality loan. And it was issued by a Turkish company called Pola Energy. They received $44 million in 2019. And actually, the bank worked with them to set certain gender KPIs within this gender bond or within this gender dual benefit bond. So it also was a climate bond, a green bond. And the bank actually assesses them on these KPIs on gender equality, and that enhances the term of their loan when they do well on those particular KPIs. So those are just a couple interesting case studies you might want to look into. We also have one here from IFC. And in addition to just this one case study, we're going to share in the chat a link here that's a bunch of case studies essentially that are very useful for you. So I'm just going to drop I can open the chat here, yeah. In here. Great. And then you can read into all of these in much more detail. Now, sorry, Landon, I ran a bit past my time, but I'd love to come to you now to explain gender bonds with everyone. So over to you, Landon.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany. So now let's have a bit of a deeper look at this type of bond, at gender bonds and what this can mean. So naturally, you might wonder what exactly are these gender bonds? So to get us started, I wanted to introduce broadly where the focus of these bonds sit, and then Tom from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange will give us much more details on this in just a moment. But for now, let's cover the basics. So as we go to the next slide, you can see here, gender-focused bonds are a subset of bonds within the green, social, and sustainability bond universe. Gender bonds are often not seen as a category of bond themselves, like we see with green bonds, but increasingly we're seeing bonds have a gender focus, either by setting distinct KPIs related to gender or linked to projects that support or enhance gender equality. What I want to highlight here is we can also see a distinct overlapping with green bonds for a climate and gender co-benefit, which we just heard a bit about from Tiffany. Now, an interesting piece is much like we saw before, the growth in social bonds is significant. So when we look at the debt markets, we can see this growth in sustainable finance through social bonds. This data is taken again from the UNCTAD World Investment Report 2023, and it shows the global issuance of sustainable bonds surpassed 1 trillion in 2021. Also, although we see declines in 2022, this was actually found to be in line with the broader bond market. So it's clear that social and mixed sustainability bonds remain on a long-term growth trajectory with nearly a 14-fold increase in annual issuance from just 2017 to 2022. So while many of you are likely familiar with green bonds, it's important to note that specifically since 2020, we've seen the significant growth in social bonds and mixed sustainability bonds, which includes bonds with gender-related objectives. Now, there's a number of guidelines to help us determine what actually qualifies as a gender bond. Importantly, these guidelines are useful whether we're the issuer of such a bond or an investor looking at investing in bonds that contribute to real gender equality impacts. You can see two examples of these on the screen: the Social Bond Principles and the Climate Bonds Initiative Social and Sustainability Bond Database Methodology. What I think is most important about these guidelines is that they help to build trust in the market and ensure that social bonds are designed to achieve their intended positive outcomes. So it's not enough just to call something a gender-focused bond. We need to understand the intended impact and whether or not that impact is actually being achieved. So that's a brief introduction to this topic. Now let's look a bit more at this in practice with our first guest speaker of the day. And today we're very pleased to have with us from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, Tom Hartman. So I'll turn it over to you now, Tom.
Thanks, London. Hello, everyone. Really great to be speaking with you now. And indeed, I will just go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started with this section. Entry points, etc. So we'll get back to you once we have a clear idea, but also. All right, you should be able to see my screen now. Perfect. All right. So thanks again for the introduction about gender bonds. And again, let me maybe go a bit more into detail about this topic and also give you the perspective from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and how exactly we deal with these bonds for us at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So thanks again, Landon and Tiffany and everyone who is able to join the call. Let me just see if I can do the full screen.
Yeah, sorry, Tom. We're not seeing your slides shared to the participants.
Landon, you have to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, my apologies, Tom. Okay.
And then everybody else could see them. I guess you just have to pick at the top of everyone's screen. There's a few different tabs you can pick, but if Landon stops sharing, it should just be Tom's as an option. So if anyone has trouble, just let us know in the chat. Sorry about that, Tom.
No problem. Is it good now? Can everyone see them? Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. So let me just get started then with the first slide. So really, when we looked at this topic at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and seeing how this was evolving on the market, we really wanted to, look at the guidance that is available and see really where, where the experts are guiding us as well. And so we saw that in 2021, there was actually the practitioner's guide that was released by the IFC in collaboration also with UN Women and the ICMA. So it's a really interesting one to look at. And we saw from this paper actually a lot of the practical elements that we have now integrated into our process for looking at these bonds. So the idea is really to see how these social bonds have a different perspective and a different dimension built into them, and making sure that those elements that are so crucial and make these types of bonds so unique are visible to investors, but are also very much being put forward by the issuers on their side as well. So actually, when we looked at this practical guide, we saw a lot of the technical elements as well that we then incorporated on our side. So if I go ahead on the next slide, you will see here that actually when we look at the gender bonds, we have, first of all, one type of bond that we identified, which are the bonds that are categorized under the social bond principles from the ICMA. So these are use of proceeds bonds that identify in a first and foremost as social bonds under the, like I said, the ICMA social bond principles. However, we see that these bonds actually have a second dimension, or let's say a more focused dimension when they're looking at these social categories, which is actually to specifically look at gender in question. So these bonds will identify specific projects, right? That's the purpose of a use of proceeds bond. And so here the idea is really to be aligning yourself with specific projects that tackle questions around gender and promoting gender equity and equality through these projects that are defined within this bond. So this is the first kind of gender-focused bond that we have identified. Of course, thanks to the practitioner's guide again, where we really use this as a foundation for the way that we operate in this. So for example, here you'll see that these use of proceeds gender-focused bonds will be targeting eligible categories from SDG 5 and using this in the pre-issuance document. So the framework, as you'll see it a lot of the time being called in the use of proceeds bonds, and making sure that those categories and those projects are outlined in this stage. And then, of course, as it is the case with any kind of use of proceeds bonds, you will then also have the post-issuance report, which is of course crucial to actually monitor that the bond is allocating the funds to those projects, as well as of course the impact report to then look at the KPIs themselves and make sure that you're actually tracking and having a positive impact via those projects that you're funding from this bond, right? So this is really the idea for the first type of let's say gender-focused bonds that you can have. And let's say also that these are really the predominant ones that we will see on the market right now. However, there's actually another type of bond as well that can also be categorized as a gender-focused bond. And this is actually a different kind of structure in terms of what the instrument looks like. And this is what we call a sustainability-linked bond, right? And so a sustainability-linked bond is a bit different from those use of proceeds bonds because they don't necessarily identify a very limited amount of projects that they will identify in the framework, like I was saying, at the pre-issuance level. No, that's not the case for an SLB, a sustainability-linked bond, because they will just actually refer to certain targets, what we call sustainability performance targets, SPTs, that are based on KPIs. And when we have SLBs that focus on these targets linked to gender equality, questions regarding or surrounding the SDG number 5 usually, then this can very much be identified as a sustainability linked bond that has a gender dimension inherent to it, right? So that's really the idea behind this kind of bond, right? So it's a bit of a different approach than we have for the use of proceeds. But it's still very much interesting to look at and something that we track as well at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. Again, kind of what I was just saying for the use of proceeds, I would say that the use of proceeds gender-focused bonds are the predominant ones that we see on the market as of right now. However, and also just generally, sustainability-linked bonds represent a smaller market share when we're looking at sustainable debt instruments. However, SLBs and gender-focused SLBs specifically are very interesting to keep an eye on as this market becomes increasingly mature over time. All right, so that's really setting the scene, what it looks like, but we also wanted to give you a couple of case studies. So I'm just going to share this video here. If you just bear with me, should be able.
Tom, if it's not working on your end, I can play it on my end.
If that's easier, are you able to
Sure.
see the video now, or is it not playing?
No, we still just see the screen.
Okay.
Don't
Yeah,
worry,
maybe it's
I'll share
easier.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
No problem, everyone. I'm just gonna share the screen. There we go. Can you see that okay?
I can see it.
Great.
Uh, we're not getting volume, I think, Tiffany.
No volume, hey? I'll reshare, but I did say share sound. So let's try one more time. Oh, it's because it's not letting me share the sound for some reason.
You give me 1 second, I'll
And maybe you should
third
try,
time's the
Landon.
charm. Yeah. Give me 1 second here, folks.
I also see while Landon's figuring that, I see Pierre, you've joined us for the second session. Thanks so much again for hosting us, Pierre.
Yes, I'll be around.
Apologies, we're having some technical difficulties here with the sound. I'm not able to share sound on my side.
That's interesting. So we're all having the same problem. Sorry, Tom, I think we'll have to skip
No
that
problem.
case
I was
study
just gonna
this
say
time.
I think we share the link as well in the chat. So it's
Perfect.
definitely an interesting video if you want to have a look at this. Let me just go back to sharing my slides then without the video. So Should be able to see them again now. All right, so I do, encourage you to have a look at this in a bit more detail if you want to have a look at the video later on. But in essence, this is a really interesting case about a gender-focused bond. So really looking at a specific case study now that was actually issued by the National Microfinance Bank, so NMB. In Tanzania, and this was issued in 2022 for the first time. So it's a really interesting case study to look at because it had this very specific gender-focused dimension, of course, anchoring itself in the social bond principles from the ICMA, right? So the objective when NMB was issuing this bond was to really look at micro, small, and medium enterprises. And in order to provide the financing loans to those MSMEs specifically. So this is what they identified as the projects in the framework for this bond issuance, right? So it's a really interesting case to look at, actually. And they estimate that there will be more than 2,000 women enterprises, so MSMEs, that will be able to benefit from funding thanks to this bond issuance. So it's really interesting, like I said, to look at, and a very, very interesting and let's say pioneering example. So it was actually the first sub-Saharan gender bond that was issued. So really interesting to look at again. And interesting, of course, for the general objectives of the bank as well to be looking at this. So that's the first one that we wanted to mention. And then we also wanted to mention, another one, which is an SLB. So like I was saying, the second type of structure that rely on KPIs linked to a sustainability performance target. So this is one issued by EQT, which is a Swedish financial corporate, and they issued actually in 2021 an SLB that is linked to targets with regards to KPIs that are very much based on the gender dimension. So the first one that they had was actually to increase the share of women investment advisory professionals, because they actually saw that there was a drop in this share after the pandemic in 2020. And so they set themselves this objective to increase the share of women investment advisory professionals to 28% by 2026. So this first objective is actually very much an internal and related to their internal recruitment targets. Of course, this being a non-financial, a financial corporate, sorry, they have a different structure from a normal corporate because they don't produce anything, let's say, themselves. They're a financial corporate. And so actually their second SPT is also really interesting to look at, because the target that they set themselves is actually to invest in more companies that have women independent board members at the portfolio companies that they invest into, right? And so the objective is to increase the share to 36% by 2026. So this is also a really interesting case to look at. Both of these cases were actually really successful and a good, let's say, template and basis to look at if you're also interested in, displaying these kinds of bonds or looking at these bonds in more details. These are two really good examples. And again, like I said, I really invite you to have a look at the video in more detail. So that's it for my side. I hope you enjoyed those two case studies and looking at the gender bonds in more detail. If you have any questions, of course, let me know now or throughout as well. That would be perfect.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. Appreciate it. I'll just give me one moment as I fix the slides. But for the next piece, we'll go into a bit more on the unit with the last section and talk about how we can see gender equality themed products being promoted in the market more generally. So at the SSE, we did an assessment of how exchanges are working with their markets to enhance gender equality as part of our guidance for exchanges on this topic. And we found there's two main ways that markets are promoting gender equality, and that is through the promotion of participation and the promotion of impact. And we'll go through both of them briefly. Apologies, we do have slides on this if you just give us one moment, but I'll continue sharing. So, what do we mean by promoting participation in markets? Well, on both the supply side and the buy side, we're seeing the application of a gender lens in global markets to access unserved segments of the market. On the sell side, we see markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. For example, Sourcing to Equal is an IFC-led initiative in partnership with the Women Entrepreneurs, with the Women's Entrepreneur Finance Initiative in Norway, and this aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to new markets via corporate procurement. On the buy side, we can see the investment in and support of women traders. This relates back to when we discussed earlier the different gender lens investment strategies as being both not just at the portfolio level, but also within the investment firm. This is because it has been well documented that all male investment teams indeed invest in fewer women-led businesses. One example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange called the JSE or hashtag JSE She Invests Summit. In addition to providing a networking opportunity, the event also covers a variety of topics, including basic finance and investment literacy, as well as showcasing different ways in which women can invest in the market. Now we switch to promoting impact. So in addition to promoting gender equal participation in markets, we also saw in our study that exchanges and markets promote financial products and companies based on their impact or their ability to actually improve gender equality, either within an organization or in society more broadly. Here we're seeing markets raise awareness of financial products and promote listed products through awards or incentives with the objective of shining a spotlight on those that are having a positive impact. We also see markets creating segments or indices that aim to make it easier to find and invest in those high impact stocks or financial products. Now, we've heard a lot about different indices already, but I think it's important to note that one index can vary from the next. So as you can see here, in order to truly capture the holistic picture, which we know from our session last week is important, we need to look at this topic from many different perspectives. So for example, if these indices were only collecting data on women on boards, this would, of course, only let us know one aspect of gender equality within a firm. In some instances, this is what we want to know, but if we're investing with the objective of either directing capital towards companies that enhance gender equality related goals in society and their companies, or because we understand the value of enhanced gender equality, like we discussed the other day, then we will want a much wider breadth of data. However, you will notice the categories will be quite similar. So you can use these categories to make sure that you're collecting a broad enough data. And as we learned last time, sometimes we can think we're solving a problem back to the owl and peacock PLC example, or improving gender equality, but actually we could make it worse or stagnate it. So the best way to prevent that is to thoroughly understand what's happening in your organization. Now we come to a Zoom poll, and we'll do one more quiz before a break to test all of your understanding of today's topic so far. So the poll on your screen gives you a few options. Let us know which you think are the reasons that investors are investing more and more funds in gender lens investments. So I'll give you some time to think through that and provide some answers. Okay, about 10 responses so far. Oh, great. Lots more answers coming in. Give it another few seconds to answer what you think so far. Okay, that's about 50%. So we'll cut it off there. Um, so a lot of folks answered for higher financial performance, about 57%, about another 57% to access untapped markets. 24% chose the third option, enhancing climate-related impacts of investments. 1 out of 38, so just one person, was to prevent men from accessing leadership positions. And then the fifth answer, to diversify portfolios, which again, about 24 folks selected. So that's fantastic. All except the fourth answer are correct here. So while gender-based investing can often be seen as a zero-sum game, with, for example, option 4, preventing men from moving forward so that women can instead, gender lens investing is not meant for this. And if this is the outcome, then it's actually being done wrong. Um, so, oh, excuse me. So now, sorry, folks. So now we'll move to a short break. Um, and we're at roughly the halfway point now. So with that, we'll just do, oh, sorry, we're trying to move to a Menti, just some tech difficulties to reflect on the first unit. And once we answer that question, we will move to a break. Okay, folks, we're,
No Menti now.
sorry. Okay, folks, we'll give you 5 minutes and we'll be back with you soon. Okay, I hope that was a couple of moments to stretch, grab a cup of tea, and then we'll get started now. So it looks like we still have everyone here, so I'll kick off again in just 1 second. So, okay, yep, I think we have everyone back now. So now that we've had a look at some of the financial instruments available to promote gender equality, let's have a look at how an organization can communicate their performance on gender equality, which could be one means of accessing these gender-specific financing mechanisms. This is not only important for communicating with investors, your impact, but also internal communication is critical to ensure that culture change that we've talked about the other day and today is a necessary aspect of performance and actually takes place. So with that, the next unit of our training has two main sections on communication, and we'll talk about both communication and transparency within an organization, among its employees, as well as with external stakeholders. And to start with, we'll look at internal stakeholders and how to effectively manage internal communication. While there's many methods used to enhance transparency within an organization, what we want to highlight today is the Gender Equality Action Plan as a tool for communicating with internal stakeholders. And to guide us on this, our colleague at UN Women, Valentine, will discuss how the WEPs can be used in action for this purpose, and I'll turn it over to Valentine now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Confirm that you can hear me.
Yep, we hear you well.
Okay. All right. I'm glad to be joining you here today. My name is Valentine Waroga. I am a program analyst in Women's Economic Empowerment, and I work with the UN Women Regional Office for East and Southern Africa. I'm based in Nairobi. So while it is important for an organization to have communication on their performance on gender equality, I'm going to look at communication from a slightly different angle. That is how to communicate to create a gender action plan that leads to the company's gender equality journey to be transparent on gender equality progress. So in this session, I will present a way to use the women's empowerment principles that you heard of from my colleague Maya on Monday to advance gender equality and women's empowerment through developing an effective gender action plan. A gender action plan is a good roadmap for achieving gender equality and women's empowerment at the workplace. It helps the company embed gender equality into its business models, that is the strategies, systems, governance, among other strategies, and contains succinct compilation of goals, indicators, and targets. As a result, the company will be more effective, efficient, and will successfully advance gender equality and women's empowerment at the workplace, the marketplace, and the community. So the basic ideas of a gender action plan is for that the company to, one, correct past and present forms of inequalities, prevent any future recurrence of discrimination and bias, ensure that all company strategies, policies and programs and activities are gender responsive and transformative, and also develops or deepens the understanding of gender equality among stakeholders within and outside the organization, and also to track progress in real time to assess where it stands on gender equality. Therefore, a gender action plan must, one, include clear goals and targets, take into consideration the findings from surveys and interviews with key stakeholders, look into human resource data, and also consider risks, challenges, and opportunities that may occur during the implementation process, and also include concrete and measurable actions. So then how do we create a gender action plan? Next slide, please. So first, we will establish clear goals that your company wants to achieve to meet the vision of the company. You can use this, you can use the 7 women's empowerment principles as a guideline for this. So for instance, if your company, your broad goals can be to foster an inclusive workplace, that is, for example, through hiring practices, or fostering an inclusive supply chain through procuring from gender responsive companies. I recommend that you use the WEP's Gender Gap Analysis tool to assess your areas of improvements and strengths. Secondly, create measures and activities that will be implemented to reach the goals you set in the first place. Again, the WEP's journey and resources provide clear steps for you to proceed. Thirdly, when you have goals and activities, you should set a baseline to monitor progress. So for instance, if your goal is to foster an inclusive workplace, what are your current recruitment policies? Such as, do you use gender-sensitive or gender-neutral job titles? In your job posting, do you ensure that all text is gender-inclusive and does not have a bias in favor of a specific gender? Another case in point would be if your goal is to foster an inclusive supply chain environment with gender-responsive companies. What does your current procurement policy look like? Do you, for example, procure from gender-responsive companies or women-owned businesses? So what we mean, for example, by gender-responsive companies are companies whose services, goods, and works that they provide consider the impact of gender equality. So baseline data is crucial for you to measure the impact of your action plan. Next is to set targets and a timeline to measure progress against milestones over time. As you all know, targets and goals are different. Targets are indicators established to determine how successfully you are achieving an objective, and the goal is an indicator established to determine whether you have achieved your objective. So simply speaking, a goal is an objective and a target has a numerical value. So when translating this in gender terms, for example, if your goal is to create an inclusive workplace, your target can be having 30% women representation at senior management level. If your goal is to create, for example, an inclusive supply chain, you can set an annual target to procure from X number of companies that are gender responsive. You can be bold enough with your goals, but make sure that they are attainable during a particular time frame. Lastly, appoint an owner to be accountable for monitoring the progress and results that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. So here there are a couple of things to consider. Think about if your goal is specific enough. Is it measurable? Is your goal realistically attainable? And how relevant is your goal to your organization? So looking at this is how relevant is your goal to your organization according to the internal stakeholders. So for example, particularly middle management. So for us, while working with numerous countries from many different cultures, we found that common fact that what senior management think do not necessarily align with what middle management sees as priority goals. So make sure that this is relevant to the organizations so that it can also be trackable. Again, then what is the time frame for achieving this goal? Like any other action plan, you need a timeline for achieving the goal. Throughout the process, consult with relevant internal stakeholders through internal surveys, group meetings, consultations, town halls, etc., and any other way to ensure that you're keeping to, first of all, communication and consultations, but also the goal is time-bound. So think of it, for example, using the SMART model that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound kind of goals. At the same time, make sure to affirm high-level support with the CEO's commitment and leadership. Establish a diverse team to advance gender equality, making gender equality and women's empowerment part of the business model, and also know your current value proposition and vision of your company. Develop questions for stakeholder consultations to better identify gaps and opportunities, and then indicate a specific time frame and deadline to develop an action and present it to the CEO and the executive team. Next slide, please. So what I want to emphasize from this slide is that internal consultations and internal communication and seeking the organization's wide buy-in are key for creating a gender action plan. So when you're creating a goal that is specific, it should be decided upon consultation with internal stakeholders. Internal communication also plays an important role when your gender action plan is ready to be rolled out and is being rolled out. It's important to communicate regularly to all employees and stakeholders to ensure that they are aware of the action plan, related activities, and progress and results generated. Make sure to collect your data on progress and share the progress on implementation in the company's internal and external communication channels, such as corporate and sustainability reports. These steps may sound challenging and you may wonder how to set target indicators, but UN Women has a set of women empowerment principles, transparency, and accountability frameworks that provide more than 70 indicators that you could use to set your targets depending on your goals so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Also, the presentation I'm making today is from our WEPS learning module on creating your gender action plan. You can take this course today if you want to recap the session we just had and create your own gender action plan. We do offer a gender action plan template for our signatories also, so please feel free to visit our website, www.weps.org, and we will post it also, /learn to understand and use the tool. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Valentine, for joining us. And what a great tool. So I hope everyone took note of that and that they make use of the WEPS tools and maybe become a signatory too, so that they can have access to that template. Thanks so much, Valentine. Now let's look at the flip side. So first we were looking at internal stakeholders. Let's look now at external stakeholders and do a little bit of a tour through disclosure. Now, before we get started, I'm just going to quickly share another poll with you and get a sense of what you all know about your organization's corporate disclosure, which could be you're not sure how they're disclosing information, which is totally fine. But let us know if you do know if your company discloses gender-related information through one or more of these mechanisms. So you can choose multiple answers here. So the first three are types of reports. So CSR, ESG, or sustainability report, maybe with your financial data and your annual financial report. Maybe they do a separate gender pay gap report, or all of the above, maybe none of the above, or you might not be sure. You might not know if your organization does disclose this information. And I'll give you just a few seconds to fill that in. I'm very impressed that one of the participants so far has said that they disclose information in all of the above. So a sustainability report, their financial report, and their gender pay gap report. So well done to that one. Let's see how everyone else is doing. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Okay, let's share these results then and see how everyone's doing. Nearly half of you participated. We almost got there, not quite, but it looks like the most common report that those of you that are disclosing information is in your CSR, ESG, sustainability report. So a separate report maybe comes out at the same time as your annual report. Maybe it comes alongside it, but it's a report that's focusing specifically on sustainability related information. Some of you also say in your annual financial report. That's really great to see too. And then very few of you, but a few of you also do a gender pay gap report or disclose information in gender pay gap report. Now, 2 of you said all 3 of those, so that's really great to those organizations. And if you do want to share your experience, please don't hesitate to share that in the chat. Quite a few of you were not sure either. So maybe that's something else that you can look into after this training to see what is being disclosed and to who. Okay, so let's now look at what we mean by disclosure. So really, I think an important thing to remember is that who you are communicating to ends up defining where you put that information and what standards or frameworks you're using to disclose that information. So for example, to report to investors, The primary location for your gender-related disclosures would be in your annual report. So at the same time, alongside your financial information, and you might use something like the International Sustainability Standards Board's S1 on sustainability information. You might also use other reporting to other stakeholders with organizations like the GRI. Now, just to note that these different standards have different audiences. So as you can see on the left-hand side, we have certain standards that are investor focused. And then we also on the right-hand side have certain standards that go beyond that, and they're multi-stakeholder focused. And they often have a bit of a different definition of what is considered kind of material or have a financial impact. Now, this is a lot on one slide, but just to kind of break it down, that can lead to us then kind of providing information in different reports, because those different reports have a different focus or a different audience. Now, we have on the far right-hand side here a sustainability report. We could also have there our gender pay gap report, for instance. And this is looking at a very specific impact or a broad kind of impact on economy, environment, people, but it's looking much beyond the impact within our organization. So that information actually provides us support then to our sustainability related financial disclosures, which are those disclosures that are really looking at how the environment, society, the economy has an impact on our organization. So an outside in look, whereas the sustainability report has an inside out look. If any of you are familiar with materiality, you might have heard single materiality and double materiality. But I think what's important to note is that our sustainability report and our pay gap report actually provide a lot of extra context and support than our sustainability related financial disclosures, which then support and inform our financial statements. So when we're talking about finance and having that connection to financial products, all this information actually feeds back to understanding how that relates back to our financial statements. Now, let's look at a few of these standards just so everybody's familiar with them. So let's start with the ISSB standards, the International Sustainability Standards Board. So many of you might be aware that there was recently a convergence of standards related to those investor-focused disclosures. And the ISSB brought together a number of organizations, such as the TCFD and the CDSB, and a bunch of alphabet soup, trying to bring it all together. Someone said, what is the concept of materiality in the chat? Materiality is really, it has many definitions, unfortunately. We often hear it as single materiality and double materiality, but what we really are looking at is by material, we mean it has an impact. So this could be a financial impact in our organization. So it affects our bottom line. It changes our financial statements. And that's often seen as kind of a single materiality. It's things outside our organization have an impact within our organization, impacting our organization's finances. But there can be materiality outside our organization too. So our activities as an organization can negatively or positively have an impact on the environment, on society, and on the economy. So we need to understand what are those impacts, because that can have an impact on, it can come back to us as a company. If we impact the environment negatively, we use up all the resources available and then we can't use them anymore and we have no business anymore, for example. Or if we have a negative impact on society, that we might have some backlash and have trouble hiring staff, for example. So materiality is really understanding what is that actual impact that we're talking about. So ISSB looks at it from a single materiality or financial materiality. So they consider anything material if it actually would change an investor's decision. So if an investor was going to make a decision on investing or not investing, and they had that information, or maybe they didn't have that information, if that would change their mind or change their decision-making, then it's certainly something that would be considered material. Now, this particular standard follows a similar kind of framework as we saw in another disclosure framework for climate called the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And they've broken it down into kind of 4 categories: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And I think even though we don't think of those as kind of gender specific, those are the categories we always think of for gender, it can help us to think through what areas in our organization gender might come into play. So think through in the governance board and the leadership, think through your strategy and how an organization is starting to think about its these risks and opportunities related to gender. Then also in risk management, how does it actually identify, assess, and prioritize potential risks and opportunities? And then metrics and targets, how does it measure it? How does it set those targets, like Valentine was just talking about to us just a moment ago. Now, another standard that you might use for disclosure is gender or GRI. Now, GRI, like most standard setting bodies, actually looks at gender equality as being kind of a cross-cutting issue. However, there's certain standards. GRI has a number of different standards that are broken down by different sectors and by topics. So you can use certain standards to get different areas of gender equality disclosure. So for example, in 2-7, it looks particularly at employees, where it requires a breakdown of gender and region. In 2-9, they look at the governance structure and composition, which also includes gender aspects. At 2-23, there's policy commitments, and 2-29, the approach to stakeholder engagement. So throughout GRI 2, we can see gender equality kind of pop up throughout, and they see it as really a kind of cross-cutting issue rather than it being its own kind of distinct issue like we often see with climate. Now, just to note, GRI is currently in a transition phase. They are changing slightly the way their standards work, but their old standards that haven't fully been transitioned yet still have a lot of value in them. For example, GRI 400, so we can see the GRI 405 is specifically on diversity and equal opportunity. We also have GRI 406, which is on non-discrimination. And GRI 103 in their management approach. They also have diversity and equal opportunity included in there. Now, I think that brings us to a few examples. And Landon, do you want to talk us through these examples?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Tiffany. So yeah, we have, we'll see how much time we have, how quickly we move through, but we have a few examples for everyone now. So the first example, now that we've looked at some of the standards, is, and sorry, I should note these are excerpts and parts from actual reports. So they represent a piece of a complete picture, and they're a current practice, and we're not passing judgment on them as to whether they're good or bad practices. So now with that disclaimer, let's look at this first example of governance disclosure from the annual report of Airtel, a Nigerian telecommunications company. So in line with the IFRS sustainability disclosure standard requirements, they reported about the processes they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability related performance. They noted that the non-financial performance KPIs linked to their sustainability strategy included gender diversity. They also note that these KPIs are linked to the board's remuneration, which I think is a pretty strong incentive to take this seriously. Now, the next example is on strategy. Strategy disclosures are aimed to help the readers of your report to understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So here we see the latest annual report of Astra International, an Indonesian conglomerate, and they outline the importance of the diversity of its employees to its success. Importantly, the statement is then backed up by a roadmap and other actions to manage the opportunity they see through a gender diverse workforce. Should note in other parts of the report, Astra goes into further details about how the company is implementing this, for example, through programs to make the workplace more suitable for women, and through a woman development program, which helps to prepare women leaders for higher level positions. Interestingly, they say that the human capital development in 2022 covers 3 focus areas, which are to build an agile organization, develop passionate and energetic leaders, so as to be able to navigate the organization in facing business challenges, as well as carry out the culture of continuous improvement and innovation to maintain Astra's relevancy in the era of disruptions. So, in other words, Astra International stated that a more diverse and gender equal business can help to maintain the company's relevancy in that era of disruptions. The third example we'll look at is an example of risk management disclosures. And here we'll look at Coca-Cola HBC's annual report. As a reminder, risk management disclosures are intended to help the reader of the report understand your processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So here, Coca-Cola HBC provided an overview of how they go about identifying material risks, which goes back to the explanation Tiffany gave a moment ago, saying that to assess inward impacts, we use our annual materiality survey, but also investor-driven frameworks such as SASB, insights from regular calls with investors, our risk management process, including climate scenario analysis, and input from our markets and business units. They also assess their outward impacts in this matrix, which you can see on the horizontal axis of the chart. So we're doing well on time, so I'll give a fourth and final example on metrics and targets. So here we have a disclosure example on disclosing the gender-related metrics and targets used by Cemex, a Mexican multinational cement company. Cemex also stated in its annual report that it's a signatory to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles and the UN Global Compact's target gender equality. So in this example, we see Cemex updating the progress made towards gender equality in its workforce. Cemex is an industry that has been traditionally male-dominated, and therefore it's starting from a lower percentage of women than perhaps a company from another industry. This example does show, however, that businesses can take action towards gender equality. Cemex also set a new goal to increase the representation of women in senior management positions, and it specified with its base year in 2022, its target of 30% and a target year of 2030. And I should note, later on in the report, they also report on metrics such as percentage of workforce by gender, percentage of female employees by position, and women to men remuneration ratio by region. With that, I'll turn it back over to Tiffany to take us through some disclosure guidelines to consider.
Thanks, Landon. So hopefully that adds a bit of color to what we mean by disclosure. But let's just keep in mind that there are actually lots of different guidelines. We actually did a study recently, and hopefully we'll be publishing that study in the next couple months now, where we looked at kind of what are the guidelines being given to different markets on gender equality. And we found that it's actually very fragmented. So we do still need kind of a condensed a disclosure guideline for gender equality. But in the meantime, hopefully we'll move towards that. In the meantime, do kind of look beyond just the standard frameworks to get a bespoke guidance or specific guidance on gender equality. The first thing that I will say you should look at is the Women Empowerment Principles. They do guide you on different areas that should be focused on and disclosure of those areas. And as a signatory, there's certain areas you should be disclosing on. However, you can also use guiding principles such as the UN Charter of Human Rights, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Remember that the SDG number 5 is specifically on gender equality, and of course the WEPs, the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. Beyond this, you should also be looking into legal requirements in certain countries. There is a requirement. For example, we looked last time at how in France, there is a requirement for 40% of board members to be women, and there's also a requirement coming forward of 40% of the executive leadership to also be women. So certain countries do have regulatory requirements either for achieving a certain quota or for disclosing certain information. There's also the disclosure standards that we've been talking about, and various different rankings and benchmarks that can be used. So we heard Monday, about the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. There's also Equileap, which is a great guideline that a lot of investors use for investing. And we have a number of other rankings and benchmarks you can use. Also take a look at ISO 26000. It's guidance on social responsibility, because gender equality is also present in that and other ISO standards. So we also have with us an expert on these disclosures and various data points, such as the gender pay gap. And I'd love to come to Sweta to discuss a bit what they do at Brightmine and the importance of the gender pay gap being shrunk. Just as a reminder, Sweta Viswanathan is a global product specialist at Brightmine, where they do a lot of work on the gender pay gap. So I'm thrilled to have you here, Sweta, and I'm going to pass over to you. You should be able to share your slides, and maybe Landon, you can take down ours.
Thank you, Tiffany. Let me try and share my screen now. Yeah. Is that visible now?
Yep, we see them. Thanks, Sweta.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Shweta Vishwanathan, as Tiffany mentioned. So I would just like to start off by saying that I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you so much for the UNSSC initiative, Rwanda Stock Exchange, and specifically Tiffany and Landon for providing this opportunity. So it was also great to hear from Tom and Valentine share insights about gender-focused bonds and gender action plan. So as Tiffany mentioned, I work as a global product specialist for pay equity analytics, specifically within LexisNexis, which is which Brightmine falls under LexisNexis, which sits under LX. So this pay equity analytics software solution was previously called GapSquare. And to just give you more context in terms of why I'm here, in this role, I actually provide subject matter expertise on how the solution can help solve pay equity issues within organizations to ensure that they are an inclusive employer. So, so I support clients across UK, US, and the EU, and I educate clients on and prospects on best practices globally to build a fairer future work. So that's a little bit about why I'm here today. But now that we've actually spent time assessing the foundation of gender equality and how regulation, reporting, and stakeholder demands underscored this need to take on the work, we actually want to get into tangible actions that you can analyze and communicate to internal and external stakeholders, as Tiffany and Valentine mentioned. So you can think about driving progress around pay equity, which, as discussed previously, is the means to achieve broader gender equality. So the first thing that we want to consider is actually evaluating your starting point. So one of the most common feedback we hear from prospective clients, partners, communities is that pay equity work is just too complex, or we just don't know where to get started. And looking at a single case study today for the purpose of this training session may also present a scenario that may seem too easy or too unreachable to many, given where they are and how they are getting started. So it's critical to note that irrespective of where you are in this journey, it doesn't have to be overwhelming work. So I'll take the next few minutes to identify some of the key considerations we want to take into account, how we get started, and the incremental steps that can be taken towards progress. So there are three phases that we want to think about. First phase being pre-assessment. So that's where you you identify your starting point. Phase two is the actual assessment, where you actually execute the pay equity study. So that could be um, representation disclosure, it could be pay gap, gender pay gap reporting, it could be equal pay, it could be several things or a combination of things. And phase three is post-assessment. That's when you think about remediation and adaptation, sorry. So let's start with the first phase, which is the pre-assessment phase. So as I mentioned, for many, just getting started might be the biggest hurdle, and no one's alone in this journey. So 24% of HR professionals actually report that their lack of clear job architecture and job leveling frameworks was a factor that was holding them back for an increased pay program communication. So in phase one, we actually want to think about four key pillars, which is your pay philosophy, motivations and objectives, stakeholder alignment, and really thinking about assessing pay gaps or comparing like for like works and like for like work and equal work for equal value. So actually, we often hear that lack of data is a barrier to progress. But in reality, any data is a good starting point. Determining job architecture and leveling by defining roles for like value is the most important theme here to understand where your starting point is and the data you might need to improve over time. So, like any other business strategy, it is critical that all stakeholders are aligned on intended outcomes. And we've heard this through the session today, and how resources that are needed to actually carry out this work is done authentically and thought about throughout. So, this does not actually mean that you think about or identify pay gap and it's closed overnight, or that you'll need millions of dollars to actually do it. It's just about assessing what key priorities are and doing the right thing. So this is where actually this box here, the metrics and KPIs, will be crucial for any pay equity analysis. So applying metrics and key performance indicators basically to ensure that you're actually building something quite practical, achievable milestone for progress. So in phase one, and it's not just about having metrics for the assessment itself, but having very clear metrics at every stage. So in this stage, thinking about timelines, ownership and accountability for each, ensuring compliance, and the budget and resources that you have for it. So that's around metrics and KPI, but we should be aware, however, that to ensure this, it shouldn't become like a tick box exercise where metrics are reported for the sake of reporting, but rather identify and evaluate the outcomes of these metrics to have a positive impact on the workforce. So that's a little bit about the pre-assessment, really setting you up for the pay equity analysis. Now, the second phase is the actual assessment. So this is when you run the analysis. Like I said, it could be a few different things. Again, an interesting stat here is that 55% of business leaders cite that complexity of pay equity analysis is their top barrier, um, which we have seen again. So and thankfully for this, there are a number of tools and technologies. So Brightmind Pay Equity Analytics is one example to that's committed in increasing efficiencies, removing room for human error and dependency on unreliable spreadsheets. So this will help inform methodology and analysis components so your teams can actually focus on truly understanding the key drivers of pay gaps within the organizations. So this root cause analysis will help them inform the prioritization of manageable incremental steps that we've spoken about. Again, in terms of metrics that we're thinking about here, it could actually be some of the metrics that we heard earlier in the session today. So determining pay gap ranges and goals, a remediation timeline, gap intervals for risk employees, and then compliance and reporting requirements. So again, having those clear goals and defining goals versus target, that would really be helpful. So I guess that's the actual assessment phase. Now, thinking about the post-assessment phase. Um, so here within this, it's actually around implementation. So this is about like sustaining and scaling progress. So like I said, it can't be a one and done exercise or a tick box exercise really. Post-assessment, aside from immediate needs for remediation, it's actually critical to ensure that you address like potential root causes of pay gap by enhancing policies and procedures to ensure an inclusive culture that addresses the individual needs of employees. So just to give you an example, when we do help our clients understand their gender pay gap, for example, results, it's not about them fixing that pay gap overnight from a 30% to 20% with X amount of resources. So pay equity analysis and actually the remediation process it takes a long time, but when it's done rightly, it can have a massive positive impact overall. So again, similar to what Valentine mentioned about the difference in opinion between management and employees, research suggests that employees report only a third of the managers, which is about 35%, have effective conversations with their teams, and nearly a quarter, which is 22%, do not have conversations. And of those that actually do, it's not very effective or it's quite ineffective, which says a lot. So, in terms of the communication piece, it's really important to make sure that it's effective communication and every stakeholder, internal and external, are on the same page about pay equity analysis. So again, so having a clear understanding of pay making decisions not only helps inform pay equity strategies, but also helps our managers with data and information needed to communicate effectively with their employees. So this sustain and scale pillar that you see here is arguably the most critical, as I've given you an example. It can't be treated as one and done. Again, think about the progress as a journey, and getting started is really the most important piece. So that's around the post-assessment phase. And in terms of metrics or KPIs that you see here, again, immediate remediation needs, that's the first thing. And actually taking efficacy of policy changes. So thinking about what policy, long-term policy changes are required based on your results, addressing representation goals as we have heard, and then actually tracking that progress of close gaps over time, ensuring that you're able to identify any potential cause for concern through these metrics. So that's a little bit about the metrics in this stage. I hope this provided you an overview of how pay equity work looks like for organizations undertaking this work. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or would like to discuss this further. Thanks again to Tiffany and Landon for facilitating this. Let me stop sharing now.
Great. Thank you so much, Sweta, for that presentation. Just share my screen again as we move to, there we go, as we move to wrapping up and closing our second session together. And with that, sorry, one second, folks. And with that, as we start to wrap up, I'd ask if you could think back on today and our previous session together. And with that, we have a final Menti for you to complete. And it's really for us to see what you learned and took away. So if you could start with, what's your level of comfort with the topic now? That would be helpful to see. Give you a few seconds to fill that out. Okay. Not seeing answers come through on my side. Is there? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. There might have just been a bit of a lag there. Okay, great. We're seeing some folks, I think, more comfortable now. Some sevens, some eights coming in. It seems like folks are perhaps more comfortable now with the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies and communicating the gender-related information to investors, and of course, communicating to colleagues the financial value of gender equality. That's fantastic to see. Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. We'll move right along to let folks continue with their days. And sorry, one second. And with that, I would want to ask, as we wrap up, to, continue learning about the subject. And by unit, we've broken down a number of resources, but I'd also like to remind everyone that you can download the handouts, which contain many resources and links to what we've discussed for further information. I also encourage you to stay tuned into SSE trainings by subscribing to our newsletter for more relevant training to you and your work. All these resources, including our partner and guest speaker slides, can be found on the SSE website, and we'll also post the recordings on our website too, in case you wish to watch them or refer to them later. And as I said, we won't obviously go through these one by one, but there's a lot of great reports and tools set out by the unit. So dozens of resources to keep you busy and keep you learning about the subject. Now, what some folks may be waiting for is knowing about the certificate of participation. So we're very grateful for any feedback you have on the training, and our appreciation will be sending out with this certificates of participation from the SSE, IFC, UN Women, and Columbia University for all those who complete a feedback survey. So you can access the feedback survey through the link being shared in the chat box now. And please keep in mind that this training was developed for listed companies and investors primarily. So we appreciate getting your feedback regarding your expectation of your market's interest in this training and whether there's anything missing that we can adjust to better suit your market's needs. We're always looking to bolster and improve our training. So we take the feedback seriously and we look to integrate it from our partners and participants as well. Now, I want to say a big thank you, or excuse me, 1 second. Before we get to thank yous, we have some contact information. Of course, the UN SSE, please reach out to us with any questions or anything we can assist you with, IFC and UN Women. And the guest speaker slides will also contain their contact information. Now, with that, to our thank yous, a big thank you to our guest speaker, Tom Hartman from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. A big thank you to Brightmind Sweta, Global Product Specialist. A very interesting presentation as always. And of course, I'd like to thank Rose from the IFC for your opening remarks and a partner and guest speaker, Valentine, for your remarks as well. With that, we do have a number of supporters, and we're always looking for new supporters and partners as well. But a special thank you to these official supporters. And we couldn't do what we do without the critical partners that we've developed our training and programs with, such as the IFC, UN Women, Columbia, and of course, a huge thank you to Rwanda Stock Exchange for hosting our training today. So in closing, thank you so much to you, all the participants, for your time and your active participation. We hope you learned something helpful, some new things from our time together, and we hope to have you join a future training and see you again soon. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pierre, for hosting us.